Have you ever wanted to make a metal material but just had no idea where to begin? Well, I was in the same spot a couple minutes ago. I tinkered around, created a material, and now I'm going to take the knowledge that I learned and pass it on to you, which some people define as the very word teaching. So yeah, today I'm going to show you how to make a completely procedural metal material. It renders very quickly. Of course, I do have a fast computer, but compared to some other materials that use quite a few nodes, this one doesn't use that many, and even these node groups, they don't use that much. It's just a bit of vector math and a bit of float math and stuff like that. And if this is one of your first, node-based tutorials and you haven't touched procedural that much, this would be an okay place to start. It wouldn't be the best, but it would be okay. So let's make this. I think it's called diamond plate metal. Is it because these things look like little diamond designs, or is it because it's as hard as diamond? No idea. Let me show you how to make this thing. So I already have a base project set up, just so I don't waste your time. Here's basically what's up. We got a sphere, no lighting. The lighting is all HDRI based, so I have some HDRI set up from HDRI Haven. Super simple setup, right? Sphere, HDRI, cycles, GPU, and stuff like that. And I think that means we're now ready to create this material. So whenever creating a material, and you saw before is wrapped along the sphere and the plane, in other words, it's all UV coordinate based, it's better to start off working off a plane and not a sphere, because the sphere has, spherical geometry. There's distortion that we don't want to think about until the very end. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a plane. This is where we're going to prototype our material. We can put this material right here, call it metal, or even metal Patreon, because by the way, this material, when we're done, is going to be available on the Patreon, just the blend, whatever, that exists. And make sure that both of these have that same material so that when we change the color, it's affecting both of these. So again, we're looking here, but whatever we do here will also affect the sphere. Okay, no bsdf, that's a bit too complicated for now. We're going to start off with texture coordinates and manipulating them until we get the pattern design of the diamonds, which when you think about it, it's just a bunch of ovals in kind of a checkerboard texture, right? To do this, texture coordinate node, we care about UV coordinates, of course. You could use object coordinates, generated coordinates, but UV coordinates make sense because they wrap around any object that you give it, given that there are UV coordinates. So maybe, just maybe, I would recommend using UV coordinates. What we're going to do is we are going to start off by making a single diamond and then making a checkerboard version of that. So to make the diamond, here is a simple trick. I'm going to start off by adding in a vector math. Notes again, UV coordinates are vector quantities. They have X, Y, and Z, although Z is suppressed to 0 since UV is only, 2 axis, whatever. We take this and we filter it through length. Again, we take coordinate values and just output the magnitude of those vectors, their length, their distance, whatever you want to call them. And you can see right now we kind of have a radial, not a spherical, but a radial gradient starting at the corner, because again, UV coordinates start right here in the corner at 0, 0, so the length is 0, and then as we go radially outwards, it's going to get brighter and brighter and brighter. Okay, why is this useful? Well, it's useful because if we manipulate this just a bit, so I'm going to add in an addition and then shift it down until it's like right in the middle. So if we want it to be in the middle, that's going to be 0.5, 0.5 on the negative direction because, a plane is 1 by 1 and you might think you want to add 0.5, 0.5, but you need to think about the inverse operation, right? We take 0.5, 0.5, which is what this was originally, subtract this, and then it's going to become the new origin, 0, 0. Point is, this is a great way to make a circle, which means it's a good way to make the ellipse, the diamond, whatever, okay? So what we want to do is now we've filtered all this vector stuff into float stuff, so now it's just a single gradient kind of situation. Let's save. What we want to do with this is just do a bit of simple math. So I'm just going to subtract kind of the other way around. And what this is going to do is it's just going to make it so that, we get more of a easy to see circular gradient. So again, before we add this, and we're just take that 0.5, subtract that away, okay? And the nice thing about this is we can always change this procedurally. One thing to note is you might think this is a circle and the black is just the abyss, there's nothing there. That's not true. In fact, the black values have some negative stuff going on that is mapped to the color black, even though there is information down here. So if I set this to greater than, and then we viewed it, okay, so you can see the circle, but then even as we go negative, you can see this is still expanding, right? There's negative information. So if we clamp this, you can see that's no longer the case. So once we go below 0, it just gives us the entire plane. but we're not going to clamp yet. So we have this basic situation, and we should also normalize it because it seems like, the bigger or the smaller the circle is, kind of the more the gradient's affected. Normalization's easy. You divide and make sure that it's the same number. So if we subtract by this, we divide by that, okay? And now we have a single controller that gives us a nice circular gradient. Cool. Don't worry about too much about what this means mathematically. Just kind of know these tricks because these are the tools that are going to be in your arsenal in the future. Okay, so now we have a single slider for this, which we don't want to bring below 0 or weird stuff happens, okay? Cool. To make this more of an ellipse or a diamond, all we need to do is kind of stretch this out vertically, right? If we stretch it out vertically, we've taken our circle and kind of made it, technically it's not an ellipse, I don't think. I think it's literally just a stretched out circle. Mathematically, they're not the same, but visually they are. So what we're going to do is we're going to add in right here, simple trick. We're going to set this to multiply by 1, 1, 1, which means do nothing, right? Because we're multiplying x, y, and z by 1, which is the identity. But if before we do this length calculation, which again gives us this radial gradient, if before we do that, we do some stretching on, let's say, the y-axis, like this, and again, it's the opposite of what you think. If you want stretching that goes bigger than 1, you have to go below 1, even though you'd think you'd want like 2 to make it twice as big, makes it half as big, right? It's always an inverse relationship, the same way there's negatives here. I'm just going to stretch this, and you can also stretch on the x-axis for thinness, but that should be our general diamond shape. And you could dive in here with RGB curves and make it not an ellipse, but this like pointy thing that looks more accurate. But we don't have time for that. We just got to keep moving on. But technically, you could do that and it would be valid. Okay? Cool. So I'm just going to clamp it at the end here for the getting rid of the negative reason. So now that we have our basic diamond, name of the game is taking this node group and basically using it again and again and again to make the checkerboard procedurally. Like we can choose how many of these ellipses we want. To do this, what I'm going to do, and this is kind of a very, very important trick. It's classic. What you want to do is you want to hit scale. So right now we're sending this through scale before it reaches any of this. So I want you to think of this as its own like thing, right? So this is already a calculation we did. What we're going to do is we are going to scale, which is going to make it look like it's just getting smaller into the corner because we're scaling towards the origin, which is in the bottom left corner, since we haven't shifted it yet. That's a thing. However, what's actually going on here is, again, we have UV coordinates that go from 0 to 1 on x and y, but now we've gone from 0 to 5 on x and y because we've scaled, we've multiplied in some sense by 5, okay? If we take this, that is going from 0 to 5, if we take this and then do a bit of a rounding, so instead of going from 0 to 5, we say go from 0 to 1, and then when it goes from 1 to 2, say again, 0 to 1, 0 to 1, 0 to 1. Just keep repeating it 5 times on both x and y. That's going to be exactly a tiling. So what I'm saying is take this. We're going to, instead of a scale this time, we're going to throw in a fraction. And you can see this gives us 5 tiles. And we can control this procedurally, 4 by 4, 3 by 3, whatever it may be. Again, the reason this works, 0 to, in this case, 4, and we're fractioning, we're taking off the integer, so everything after the decimal place is preserved. It goes 0 to 1, 0 to 1, 0 to 1, 0 to 1, okay? We take this, we plug it in here into our calculation we already did, again, only on the top socket. What it's going to output is, again, the same design, but now a arbitrary, because we can, pick this number arbitrarily, number of times. Okay, cool. So now we just need to do a tiny bit of a manipulation, and then we're actually going to be very close to done. First thing I want to do is a bit of a rotation. So vector rotate does that by, I think it should be 45 degrees, but you're seeing that, again, it's rotating from the wrong area because even though we've scaled it by 5, now each of them in some sense has an origin in the bottom left. We still need to correct for that. We can either do that with some vector math, or the rotation center should be in the middle of the tile, which again, 0.5, 0.5, and z doesn't matter. And I think it should be positive 0.5, like that. So now when we rotate it, you can see it's actually going around the center of the ellipse. 45 degrees is halfway between vertical and horizontal, so that's what we want. Okay? Important thing to emphasize, we can again change the number of tiles, you already know this, but at any point we can change the shape of these and it's going to affect all of them at the same time, which might be something you want to make a parameter later down the road. But for now, let's not worry about that. What we do want to worry about is this isn't really the correct pattern because, let me just go back to the original just for a moment. What it's supposed to look like in my research is you have kind of like a cross hatching. Some of them are going vertical, or I guess some of them are rotated 45 degrees, some of them negative 45 degrees in this kind of lattice checkerboard kind of situation. That's what we want to do. And I guess what you could do, there's kind of, whoops, I opened up the wrong one file. And look at that, we're done with the tutorial. Let's go back to the original. What you could do is and this is kind of like probably the cleaner but more complicated version, you could either multiply, or I guess use an angle of 45 or negative 45 depending on the tile, and there might be a bit of complicated math that's involved there, like you need to see which tiles, is it going to be kind of like an even odd kind of situation. This would be the clean way to do it, so that's what I would recommend, but in the interest of making it understandable, we're going to use kind of the more brute force, doesn't make much sense, but whatever, it works kind of version where we duplicate this. We're then going to use this node group again, so I'm just going to use UV coordinates again. Nothing has changed between this top version and this bottom version. They're literally identical, but with this bottom version, we go minus 45. So these are faced the other way, and these are faced this way. Again, this is more computationally expensive, not by a lot, it doesn't matter, but ideally you kind of throw it all in here. Okay, so what do we have so far? If we take this and let's do a math addition, so we are adding the contribution from each, we get an X pattern. Why? Because we have these ellipses that are rotated around the same origin by 45 and negative 45, so they're going to be at 90-degree angles to each other, making X's, which is, in its own right, it's a cool pattern, but it's not what we want, right? What we want to do with this is, for the bottom group, or you could do this on the top, it doesn't matter. So something controlling only the negative 45 degree version, what we're going to do is before we even rotate is we can do a bit of a shifting. So I guess we want to do that before. So again, I'm just going to manipulate these texture coordinates. So I'm going to set this to addition. Let's set this to 0 for now, even though that was already the correct value. So right now we're adding by 0, so nothing's happening, but only for the bottom version, you can actually shift them individually. And this number is, of course, going to be dependent on this. So if we change this scale, you can see they're not necessarily in the correct position. One way to account for this, by the way, so once you've picked your value and it's set, good. If you don't want to do some complicated math thing where they're like dependent on each other, is we can throw in a scale before either of these chains happen, and now they're like scaled together. So that's just a way we don't need to think about it. And since that's actually a pretty important parameter, let's throw a value node in there so we can control it later down the line. Okay, so now we have our base pattern. It's kind of that simple, not much to think about. And now the question is, how do we make this look like metal? Because this is kind of like the main component, but it's not reflective, metallic, whatever it's supposed to be, right? One thing to notice before we get into that is, again, everything we did before is actually happening on the sphere as well, but this time it's using the UV coordinates of the sphere, right? If I was to open the UV editor, this is the UV coordinates of the sphere, you can see it's actually dependent on them. And you can wrap this on any object that has a UV map, right? Because this is UV dependent, it works. However, if you're looking at it from the camera view, might be a good idea to just rotate the poles away. Otherwise, you're going to see this like stretching on the top. Okay, what was the point? The point is we need to make this look like metal, okay? So basically everything here, and we can you put frames inside of frames? Ooh, I guess you can. Frameception, cool. So that's something I even learned on this tutorial. So everything we've done here, consider it baked in. Now the question is, now that we have this pattern, what do we do between here and the material output to make this look good, right? Remember, we already have an HDRI in our scene setup, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a principled bsdf like we had before, okay? So now we have a nicely shaded sphere that's using the HDRI. To make this look good, first of all, we make it metallic because it's a metal. Second of all, we make it darker because it's like a dark metal. And third of all, we want our pattern to be kind of the height or the displacement or offset of the sphere. Now, you could do this with actual displacement mapping. I wouldn't recommend it because it's computationally expensive, and we can actually get away with just normal mapping. So I'm going to use a bump node to feed in normal sockets. So again, we're taking our BSDF, feeding in normal information from the bump node, which what it does is it converts basically like a factor type of map, just like float input black and white. It turns this into, so let's put this in height, into information that's actually useful for us, right? So plug this into height, and then we get our normal map. which you can see actually looks like this. So now you can see it's actually looking like it's three-dimensional, even though when we look really close at the silhouette, it's not actually 3D. It just looks like it is. You could do this with displacement. Okay, so this is a good start, but another thing we can do just to add a bit more control. Oh, did I create a subframe inside a frame? Whatever, don't worry about it. What we can do to make this look a bit better is you can see it's kind of like pinching at the top, whereas it's supposed to have kind of like a flat top or base, whatever you want to call it, as we can add in a addition. So I guess you could keep it on clamp. And you can see what this is doing is it's taking the map from before and it's kind of like flattening out the top. If we think about why this is the case, and it might be a bit confusing to think about that. But if we think about why this is the case, is we have this nice gradient where it's 1 only exactly at the very top or the very top line. What we're doing is we're saying a lot more values can be mapped to 1, right? Because we're adding and then we're clamping, right? If we didn't clamp, we wouldn't necessarily, let's actually see the bsdf, we wouldn't necessarily have that flat top because anything that's above 1 rounded down to 1, which makes it flat, and we can actually increase or decrease this. So we can take this and duplicate it so that both of them have that, okay? That's the flat top thing. By the way, if you're trying to do this like perfectly mathematically correctly, I guess you wouldn't add because then you have like grayness everywhere else. But we don't actually need to worry about that too much. Like technically not correct, but whatever. Just like with other things, we're just looking for fast results. That technically nothing wrong with them, okay? So far, what do we have? We have a value that lets us control the scale of this pattern. You could also make it really small. We have our UV coordinates, and in theory, we could control each of these individually if you wanted to, and the base or top flattening. Just to make it look a bit more metallic. And by the way, if you want this to be less intense, literally just the strength of the normal mapping is going to make it like more or less intense. So you can decide what you want there. For now, we'll keep it at 1. One other thing that is kind of pivotal, it's kind of the thing that makes it look photorealistic, is adding a bit of grunge, dirt, like roughness things where some areas are shiny and some aren't, and those could be, you know, the dirty areas. To do that, we don't need to do anything complicated, right? We just use a noice texture, which already kind of has this muddy look to it. Just to increase the contrast between like dirt and not dirt. Color ramp can do that pretty easily, so just bring these handles closer to each other. And this is what we're going to be using is the tongue. It's just moving where it wants to. And it needs to stay in place, do as it's told. What was I talking about? I was talking about making dirt. Because we have this color ramp and the noise texture, basically our entire dirt pass is going to be controlled by this, so we can control like the density of it. So now we have a very small, I guess a large numerically, but small visually scale. We can make it detailed dirt, we can make it very rough, and I would recommend bringing this near or to 1. What we want to do with this is to actually incorporate it. I guess there's a couple things we could do. First of all, take this, connect it to roughness, which immediately is not going to give us the right thing. It's going to give us some areas that are indeed rough and some that are like, in fact, too shiny, like a mirror ball. To do that, again, black, where roughness is 0. In other words, it's perfectly shiny, right? So 0 means shiny, 1 means, what's the word? Diffuse. Not shiny at all. What we could do to fix this, take the black value, so what is the most shiny, and then just bring it up so it's like nothing crazy, like 0.4, 0.5, something like that. So we still do have a distinction between dirt and not dirt. However, now it's not like super shiny in some areas. So that's the first thing we can do. We can also use this as a base color, so wherever we have the shininess thing going on, we're also going to have some discoloration, which is a good thing. We can also use this to kind of drive the overall color with a addition or subtraction. I guess subtraction is probably a better way to think about it. We could subtract to make it darker, but still keeping those color variations where it's supposed to be shiny. So there we go. Okay, so that's a good start. One of the things, by the way, that's making this look super, super not real, you never see the diamonds this big. So let me actually just make this a bit smaller, so 6 by 6. Now it's looking a lot more real, and I think that's kind of the essence of it. Like we could also add in scratches and stuff like that. However, kind of the point of this diamond plating is I don't think any surfaces could really touch anything that's like part of the actual sphere, because it would just hit this thing that's kind of like offset from it. One thing I like to do before wrapping up the project, even though I guess we've made the material and you could add in a bit more, stuff here to make it a bit more complex, I always like, again, since this is using UV mapping, so we could use whatever object, I like to throw in a plane. You probably saw this with the original render. If I decided to do this, I just bring this down, I rotate it a bit, but I guess using global coordinates. And what I like to do is we're going to give this the same material. So again, you can have multiple objects with the same material. And now the nice thing about this is, since they are driven by, basically one number, is this is going to control the sizing. Let's do this in EV, just so it's a bit faster. Won't look good, but whatever. We're controlling the sizing for both of these at the same time. So this is just to emphasize you could have multiple objects with this material. In fact, if you wanted like one of these to have like smaller, because it kind of looks like these diamonds are smaller than the planes. If you wanted to separate these, what you could do is make a, not so that every object is using the same material, but actually separate materials that started off the same. You just hit this button right here. And now we have metal Patreon 001. So this is another version. This one's only going to control the plane. And now you can see we can change the sizing of this without actually affecting the sphere. But in general, the rest of what made this look like super good, I guess, in my opinion, I made it, so I'm not going to be like crazy about this. I keep opening the wrong one. What made this look super good is, I guess, the lighting, stuff like that. In fact, if I could go back, I'd make these tiles a bit smaller. It's lighting, it's depth of field, it's stuff like that. But in general, that is how you make a metallic diamond plate material. I don't know what it's called. Anyways, hope you enjoyed the tutorial. And since we're at the end of it, I like to do this pitch. I'll keep it quick. Patreon exists. This one file and anything I've ever uploaded before is available to patrons. Additionally, exclusive tutorials that I do not post here are on the CG Matter channel. Those tend to be tutorial series for different effects that would take too long to make a single tutorial for. Those exist there. Discord access for private channels, behind the scenes, early access. I think this tutorial specifically, not at the point you're watching it, but back when it was recorded, I posted it a day early on Patreon. Just a thing. So to all 550, some 60, I don't know, to all many patrons that are currently doing that, thank you for supporting both these tutorials. I like to put your names in the credits because you are, in some sense, in every sense, the producers for this. So yeah, for any people who aren't patrons and are considering, well, thanks for considering. And for everybody else who has like no idea what I'm talking about and just wants to move on, thank you for watching this tutorial. I hope you learned something. I hope this was a understandable procedural tutorial. It shouldn't have been too bad. The only difference here is I kind of took those frames and made them node groups instead, but generally same idea. And yeah, that's the show. See ya.